So hopefully you've taken the time to do this activity and try to match the emotion to the face. You should end up with contempt, sadness, disgust, happiness, anger, fear, and surprise. We are very adept, should I say, at being able to match emotions to the facial features that we see because we're social creatures. And as a result, we should be able to judge quite well and quite effectively what somebody else feels based on their facial expressions. However, there may be times when that might not be true. There might be a time whereby you have showcased this happiness face. However, maybe you have some other emotion that is actually playing a part. We have sometimes showcased ourselves to be happy when actually we're anxious, or we're worried, or we're angry, or we're upset, and we haven't allowed our real emotions to come through because we're putting a brave face on. So we have to be clear that sometimes when you're going to communicate with others, they may be putting on a defense mechanism. They may not be showcasing you exactly what is going on. The same thing might happen if somebody is fearful. They might actually show anger as an emotion. A small child who doesn't know how to deal with their emotions might show an outburst of anger or suddenly start crying because they cannot deal with the emotions that are going on inside. Maybe their emotions are sort of not understood fully, and so it might be problematic. There might also be a problem whereby some individuals are not clear about what emotion is being shown to them. Sometimes people might not be able to read other people if they have had individuals who have suffered from abuse or have been in a difficult relationship when they were growing up, so for example with their caregivers, and so they haven't understood that anger is as anger, and they might take anger as another form of emotion whereby they just assume it's a normal aspect, or they might think that sadness, having experienced individuals who are always sad in their lives, that is a normal way to be able to feel that emotion, and that goes for good days, it goes for bad days, it goes for if you're unhappy or happy or fearful or anything else. So there could be a number of reasons why people might not quite be able to judge emotions that well. But initially, we are really good at being able to judge what somebody is feeling or how they are. Because if you go and see your friend, for example, and you meet them in the street and you saw their facial expressions, you'd be able to judge straight away where they are within their sort of emotional state. It might be a little bit more difficult now if we had to, for example, add a face mask. Let's see if we can do that. So, for example, with this face mask covering, for example, is it really possible? Yes, perhaps you might be able to see the eyes, and so that might be appropriate. So what we can see is these individuals with their face masks on, we should be able to maybe still see how much of that we can judge, because sometimes you can take a look at the eyes and say maybe perhaps based on the eyes you might be able to tell, but the eyes here and here are quite similar, and this is quite similar as well. So it might be a little bit difficult to judge. Furthermore, if people have issues with their vision and they're not able to see what the facial expression looks like, just because, for example, the mask, or if they're not able to see it because of their visual impairment, then that's going to also play a part. So on the one hand, I will keep returning to we are social creatures and we're very good at reading each other, especially with your faces. However, sometimes there might be some pointers as to why that might not happen. Furthermore, another reason might be there might actually be an issue with the individual. So Mobius syndrome is a disorder that affects the nerves on the face, or it's very rare for obvious reasons because we're not clear about it, but It says we're not really sure what causes it. So it could be about certain medicines that are taken during pregnancy. It could be maybe the nerve development or the blood supply to the nerves during the embryo might be disrupted. But what we do understand is that people with this condition, for example, this syndrome, can't move their faces. They cannot smile. They can't frown. They can't blink their eyes. They have no facial expressions, which makes them really difficult to gauge. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they angry? And so if you imagine that there was a child who has this as their sort of starting point, it might affect the bonding aspect with the parent, because the parent would not be able to judge from the beginning, is that child happy, is that child unhappy, is that child depressed about something, not necessarily depressed, but disgusted by something. And so all the emotions will be jumbled up because they can't say it initially as a baby, and secondly can't show it in their faces for the parents to be able to bond specifically in that expected norms. Now obviously they will find a way to bond. They will understand the child and the baby as time goes on, but you can understand that there might be a bit of an issue with the bonding experience, and it might be difficult, for example, for that child to be able to express themselves in a school setting and then go on and on. Obviously over time strategies would be found, but it could cause some problems with communication. What can also happen is, because there's nerve damage, it might also have a problem for the individual with their hearing. They might have problems and issues with coughing, and that can be quite dangerous, because if you think about you needing to cough and you cough to cough up things, if something is stuck in your throat, that means there might be other issues about how much danger might be involved in them being able to care for themselves. They might not be able to talk clearly either. So not only is the facial initial expression of the non-verbal communication not working in the same way that we would expect and causing a bit of a barrier, but then if the talking is also problematic, then you've got twofold issues there, and of course swallowing. Now, if we put this syndrome aside, there might be other reasons as to why people might have issues with expressing what they feel on their faces, in the standard version that we were looking at before about disgust, sadness, happiness, and so on. It might be because they had damage to the nerves and to the face, and that would obviously mean that they can't move the face as they need to. It might be because they've had an infection. It might be because they've had a stroke, and all of these things play a part in how they would be able to effectively communicate. So we need to be aware that when we are looking at, for example, these images here, it might not be so clear even when you remove the mask. It might not be so clear as to who is feeling what emotion because of the things that we talked about. So part of the homework activity that I'd like to leave you with is to consider the aspects of different formats of communication. Now, we did talk about some of them. So the written format, maybe some communication aids. So for example, using Siri, for example, is a speech generated instructor, or voice operated, should I say. Speech to text type of formats of aids as well, which will help support people to write from their speaking to the written format. And now that is also possible with Siri, but some others might be available. And then you need to consider the setting. So you need to consider the settings. So for example, the one-to-one setting and the group setting. Do try and consider where there might be one-to-one setting, where within healthcare and within social care, and then where there might be group settings for people to be communicating and interacting as well. Furthermore, lastly, you need to look at the formality and informality aspect. So when might communication need to be formal? When might communication need to be informal? The more you can find different examples, the better you'll be able to consider all the various type of individuals who might be involved in communication. So do complete that task before you come in next time. I want to bring your focus again to the external task. The external task is due on the 18th of December. I would suggest what you do is you print and you save it, and then we will look through it and give you some guidance about what we've received from the external board, and you will have an attempt to do the first version. If you fail the first version, you'll have to do another different unit, but we will take some time later on to be able to guide you through that a little bit. Now, this whole task has been very much centered around the D1 1.1, and if we can talk about how it's linked to your internal assignment, it is you needed to explain the use of communication in health and social care. So for that, you need to provide information to explain the different types of communication used in health and social care settings, and then the different range of people who might need to communicate between each other, and finally, the different reasons for communicating within the health and social care setting. So we have been going through and covering those, and we will again go back and look at some of your homework, for example, to be able to see the range of people, the range of reasons, the range of methods, for example. So, there's always a homework slide, because although I've told you to do all this work within it, the homework slide will just encapsulate everything that you're supposed to do. So, for example, you need to write up your notes with references, and I'll show you how to write your references, for example. And you need to look through all the slides to be able to get more information. So each time we do some work, you need to be able to go and find references to support that. So research that will give you that guidance. Now, what I've done is I've already embedded a number of references or go-to points for reading, and as the weeks go on, you'll have more and more. So you need to go to those places and get that information, write your notes, and be prepared to be able to input that into your assignment if it's relevant. Do always make sure that you bring your work in or you upload it where I've suggested, so for example on Teams or emailing it to me. And the next area we're going to be looking at is Argyle's communication cycle and Tuckman's theory of group development. So what's really important is you prepare for it so that you know what we're talking about when the session turns up. The plenary is always about making sure you've checked that you've actually done what you said you were going to do. So that would mean, for example, from the aims and objectives, so did you identify the reasons for communication and write about them? Did you identify ways to communicate with others? Did you consider problems that may occur when trying to communicate? And did you identify the emotions from the images and explain why? Now, you need to be in a position whereby you're slowly ticking these off. And if you find that you're not getting that, then you need to go back and you need to work on it. After you've worked on it and you've spoken to a number of your colleagues, then you should come back to myself if you're still not clear about what you need to do to be able to tick that off. Remember, if you don't do any learning, if you don't do any development in yourself, then you would have wasted your time here. So the whole point is to develop and to move forward. The last section here is just to give you a format of how the references are supposed to be placed. So at the end of your work, you're always supposed to have your references. Now what I've done is I've put it chronologically as to where it appeared within the slides, but over time what I will do is I'll make sure that they are alphabetical. So Care Documents needs to go first, Donnelly needs to go next, England needs to go next, then Smile Foundation needs to go last. So all of those areas are there, and the reference is usually formatted in an appropriate way, and this is Harvard style of referencing. I will do a video about referencing at a later date. Thank you very much, and we've been looking at D1 for communication.